Welcome, everyone. It's Mark Taylor here from Patient Led Oncology and the Hacking Cancer Research Portal. And I'm very pleased today to introduce Julie. Good morning or good evening for you, isn't it? It's morning for me.
Yes. Good morning. It is evening here, but good
Yeah.
morning.
And we've got a lot to talk about. Yeah, so we just had a brief chat before we started recording, and we are trying to work out how we met, and we came to the realization that you were one of the first members of Patient Led Oncology when we were pre-logo, pre-anything. I think probably
I
all
think
top
so.
first 50 or so. It was kind of like very
Yeah.
long, like 5.5 years ago. Must have been like
I think it was actually probably more like six
oh wow,
or
yeah.
six and a half years ago because I think that I first got connected with you pretty early in my diagnosis, and I don't remember exactly how we got connected, but I remember having a call with you and you were talking about your vision and I think you were in school at the time. Does that
Yeah,
sound
I was
right?
doing an MBA. Yeah,
And you did a project
yeah,
on
exactly.
patient-led oncology, essentially. And I remember we had one call and I got off the phone and I told my husband, I will not lose contact with this guy. Like he's on to something and I need to be connected to what he's doing. And it's been really cool to watch how far it's all come.
Oh, amazing, amazing. Oh, it brings emotions to me. Wow, it's weird going back that far. It was, yeah, it was. I was having my own crisis during my MBA, and I did a project on this, which is still ongoing. So yeah, and yeah, you were part of the group. We had the call, and do you want to give a bit of background behind what you were going through at the time?
Yeah, sure. So in July of 2019, I was diagnosed with a rare cancer, so undifferentiated pleomorphic sarcoma was what I was diagnosed with. At the time of my diagnosis, my cancer was localized, actually had a decent prognosis. So, I had less motivation in the very early stages to go outside of conventional oncology because my prognosis was really good. And after after my original diagnosis, I had a quick recurrence. Actually, I recurred during radiation therapy just 3 months after I was diagnosed. And so that changed things for me from a prognosis standpoint. And that's probably when I started to become more serious about looking outside of conventional oncology. I had actually been gifted a book, Radical Remission, by my boss at the time. And it was really like, I remember he said like, "Hey, I'm just gonna drop this off. Maybe you'll want to read it, maybe you won't." He didn't know anything about it, but he had had a nephew that had apparently, you know, outlived his prognosis and with colon cancer, and the nephew really credited some of the radical remission principles to to his survival. And so, after a surgery, I kind of opened the book and read it and became pretty enamored with the principles in radical remission. And I would say it felt like there was a lot I couldn't control about what I was going through, but I thought the radical remission philosophy did give me some areas that I could control. And that was probably the first thing that I really latched onto. And that was when I started just exploring and experimenting just a little bit. I ended up doing all of the standard of care that would have been prescribed to me. So I did radiation, I had that recurrence. I had that recurrence surgically resected. I did chemotherapy. I did 6 cycles of a very intense chemotherapy, doxorubicin, and ifosfamide. Um, and then 4 months after my chemotherapy ended, I on a off-cycle scan, we found one singular lung met. And so that, solidified my stage 4 diagnosis. And that was in 2020. And I remember that was a pretty pivotal moment for me because that's when I ended up having that lung met removed. But I remember my oncologist said to me, it's not a matter of if it comes back, it's a matter of when it comes back. And he basically said, we're not going to do anything now from standard of care because we don't have a tumor to watch. So you're basically back on surveillance. But given how your disease has recurred quickly, you should be prepared that this is probably going to recur kind of sooner rather than later. And that was almost 6 years ago. I haven't had a recurrence since then. And when he told me there was no standard of care that he was going to offer me, I took that as my invitation to start experimenting with other things that I could access. Um, and so that led me down many different paths from mental, mind body work to IVs to supplements to exercise to acupuncture to energy work. I just basically tried to explore all of the paths that I could get access
The
to.
kitchen sink. Similar approach
Yeah.
to me as well. Yeah. So no,
Yeah,
that's
and
I think
ultimately one of the big things that I ended up focusing on was vaccines.
yeah.
And, um, that's been something that's been, I think, pretty helpful for me. When I was going through all of that, I was also working full time. And I had 4 young kids at home. So when I was diagnosed, my kids were 7 to less than a year old. So there was certainly a lot at home that also we were trying to juggle.
Yeah. Yeah. And the job was quite stressful, right? Yeah, I think at the time we're talking it was
Yeah, the job was stressful. I will say, my company was very understanding of my situation, and I feel like I felt like they handled the situation well. Um, but it really became clear that what I was doing was not aligned with my passions. It wasn't, I was leaving very drained. I was having a difficult time focusing on the work. My mind was obviously in the cancer space and in wanting to get better. Um, and the hard part about leaving was that my job financed all of these therapies that
yeah.
I was trying. When I first started to explore this space, my husband said, listen, take your salary, whatever you make, and we're just going to assume that that is gone and that goes to fund anything that you want to do. And we'll make changes in the rest of our life to care for the family, the house, the kids on his salary. Um, and so when I decided to leave my job, that was a major, major decision that probably took me almost a year to finally make.
Mm. I think yeah, me and you went on the same process, right? So same for me. I think we were going through this stuff at the same time,
Yeah.
and I also had to. How long into the journey did you, or how long ago did you have to quit your job?
So I quit my job 3 years after I was diagnosed.
Oh, okay, very similar. So 3 years ago.
Yeah.
We're on literally the same story. Same for me. Um, so I had some time to get this movement going, I guess, at that point. So I had something to move into. But I guess you did as well, right? So you managed to get how soon after to get another a role?
So I left I left my corporate job. I worked in brand marketing and kind of business management. I left my corporate job with zero intention of getting a new job. It really was, I was going to step back. I wanted more time with my kids, and my family. And about 2 weeks after after I left my job, I was approached by the Jamie Leandro Foundation, which is a vaccine access program here in the US. And I had worked closely with them on my own case. There were some nuances to my case in the vaccine space that made it somewhat unique. And through that kind of more unique case, I was able to work really closely with them. And they knew that I had a passion for the vaccine space, and I had learned a lot as a patient about vaccines. And they reached out asking if I would be interested in doing patient intake for them. So my job is to meet with prospective patients, talk to them about our program, help them access the necessary testing, get them all lined up to basically start the vaccine development process. I started doing that in 2023. I still do that today. Um, and I do only work part-time, so that's a
Oh,
nice
perfect.
balance that allows me to maintain kind of the presence at home, but also stay connected professionally.
Yeah. I mean, it's a very interesting topic point. I think it comes up a lot in patients I coach is, if you have money to pay for all these treatments, but you're in a job that's stressing you out and maybe not helping you heal, it's a complex decision to step out of one and then seek something new.
It's
And
super complex.
yeah, and then it's kind of interesting. I need to look at other cases, but um, it's a funny thing in that fear that people have in stepping outside of that safe zone. But quite often, life just does align, right? And something does come up that suits and
Yeah.
fits. And yeah, same
Yeah,
for me.
I mean, it's been, I have no regrets about the decision that I made. It
Yeah,
was definitely the right decision. But I had known that it was the right decision for a while. It was just the logistics that were keeping me up at night. And, I feel like when you get to that point where you know internally that it's the right thing and you're worried about the logistics, I feel like the logistics they will take care of themselves
yeah,
essentially.
yeah,
So, yeah, I had reached that point where I knew it was time to move on to something else, even if that something else meant I was not working professionally. That was actually what I thought
yeah,
the next few years would hold for me. So,
yeah. It's a big talking point. I think people can look back on their lives and at the diagnosis and find things that may be contributing. I mean, I think work in a lot of cases for people is stressful and maybe doesn't allow people to kind of manage their energies well. But I've seen situations where relationships are not in a healthy space or where they live is not in a healthy space. And I have a lot. It's kind of it's interesting because I dialogue with a lot of patients when you're going through the anxiety of the diagnosis, the extra anxiety that comes with quitting a job, worrying about financial stress, and it's too difficult for a lot of people. Um,
yeah.
yeah, I'd love to hear from people out there actually, if people are watching this, about if they've got stories of actually quitting, because I think people would like more hope from stories like you, where the stepping out of the comfort zone and into something that was more aligned with what you're doing worked out well, as it did for me. And it's kind of interesting. I'm sure there are a lot more like that. I'm sure in most cases it does work out, but from my
Yeah.
from my experience, a large majority are in utter fear of any change. They're almost in too much anxiety with the diagnosis to force some difficulty in stepping into the unknown.
Yeah, and I mean sometimes it's just what's the one step
Yeah.
that sometimes like for me even going from working full time to not working at all, that was a very big step for me to take. So the interim step was asking for a modified role that I felt was more
Okay.
aligned with my skill set, where I could almost work a little bit more on autopilot.
Yeah.
And so for me, I had to take baby steps away until I felt like, okay, the anxiety associated with my diagnosis was different, right? I
Mm,
had had some time where I was no evidence of disease. Um, I felt like I had some areas that I could focus on, like vaccines, like exercise, like mind body work. I felt like I had had these, I kind of identified these core pillars that I
mm,
felt like I could continue to explore. Um, versus before I was doing so many things, and I'm not sure I don't have any idea what was helpful and what may have been hurtful, but I just it was little. I had to take little mini steps away.
yeah.
Finally, until I got to the point where I felt like I could walk away.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, it was similar for me. My company was quite understanding and allowed me to kind of like. I actually had a period where I could start building up patient-led oncology in the background, so I had a
Yeah,
smooth transition across. So yeah, it's another way of managing it. Yeah, if you've got an understanding boss, that's very
yeah,
helpful. Um, and then okay, yeah, I mean, you did what some people call the kitchen sink, which is from these long form videos that I'm doing. It comes up basically in all the cases because there's and this is partly why I'm doing these because there's still a lot of people who want to think in mono treatments, whether it's fenbendazole or cannabis oil, and from following exceptional responders for 6 years now, it's typically the need to do all these pillars that really is the thing that gets the results. So let's talk. You've done a lot, similar to me, or you're almost at my level. Um, do you want to talk about the mind body stuff first? Do you want to go through what you
sure.
did there?
Yeah. So, it's interesting. When I had my metastatic diagnosis, I think I think I probably would have been evaluated as being clinically depressed.
Mm,
It was a really difficult time for me. I had four young kids. People, the prognosis just was not good at all. There were very few therapies that I felt like would be available to me. Um, and it I don't even know if I can even put words to how hard it was to live through that.
mm,
Especially on the parenting side. Um, the the addition of these four lives that, I felt I have been called to like raise and nurture, and now I felt like somehow that was going to be taken from me. Like that was the most difficult thing to reconcile, and that was kind of debilitating for me. And I spent a decent amount of time preparing to die, to be honest.
mm,
I was, I still have upstairs like boxes that I was preparing for each of my mementos and things in there, memory books, all of these things. And one day, I kind of like, I don't know, it just came over me like, wait a minute, I'm feeling really good. And like, what if I'm not dying? I'm
mm,
actually alive today and
yeah.
I'm doing quite well today. So, it was just this slight mental shift. And I was, I had also started doing cognitive behavioral therapy,
Mm,
and we were focusing on reframing negative thoughts.
mm,
And so that was like my first tippy toe into some of the mind body stuff. And the framework for months, I actually carried around papers in my bag that had this like thought process on it. And when I had a negative thought, I would write it in, I would fill in all of these boxes and walking myself through this framework helped me reframe some of those negative thoughts. And I actually found it to be really helpful. So, once I started seeing some momentum in that, I started wondering, like, what else could I do that would make my mind more of an asset to my healing journey? And it's interesting because earlier in my life, I was a collegiate athlete. And prior to playing in college, I went through a period of time where I did some very intense mental training for my sport. And it was transformative for me as an athlete. And I remember saying to my husband, like, as I'm processing all of this and as I'm slowly moving out of this very dark space, I remember saying to my husband, like, I wonder if there's any mental coach in the cancer space because the work that I did as an athlete was transformative for me. And if I could figure out how to bring that same kind of mental um, focus and like thought process to cancer, perhaps I could use my mind as an asset. And one of the things I did early in, and I still do, like one of the probably best things I ever did was I just networked with patients. From the day I was diagnosed, I just reached out to every patient that I could talk to. Um, and I particularly wanted to talk to people who had beat the odds of whatever their cancer was. And I wanted to hear I was looking for what are the consistent themes. Um, and the other thing I did was I would watch or read any video that I could get my hands on that related to cancer, alternative approaches to cancer, things like that. And I watched what seems like a million TED Talks
Mm.
in the area of cancer. And what I realized is these people who give these TED Talks, many of them were more than they were open to talking to me as a patient and going a little bit deeper in some of their learnings. And I had come across someone that was doing hypnosis for cancer patients. And so that was probably the next step that I took. And I did a hypnosis deep dive. It was a 15-hour,
Wow, wow. 15 hours.
multiple day session where we not only did hypnosis, and the hypnosis was not just around the cancer, but it was also around other things that could have been kind of in the way, if you will,
Mm.
that may have happened as a child, a young adult, somewhere along your life. And that was really helpful. There was a whole program afterwards where he taught me basically self-hypnosis and how I could kind of get myself into that space. There were many different mental exercises that we went through, everything from visualization to, I remember he had me create a list. I had to come up with 50 reasons why I should be an exceptional responder.
Wow.
Um, he had me writing, statements that are still hanging around my house. And I was supposed to repeat these statements every time I saw one of these reminders hanging out throughout my house. Um, Little things like that. And again, like that ended up being really helpful. He taught me EFT and
Mm.
tapping. And that was another tool that I could bring home from that session. And that actually, there was a lot of mindfulness, there was a lot of meditation, there was a lot of mind-body tools that I ended up using and I felt were were really helpful in kind of replacing some of the negative thoughts. There were tools that helped me kind of start to believe that
Yeah.
there was this idea, even in some of the Joe Dispenza work that I did, there was this idea of like, you have to feel that it's possible in your
Exactly,
body.
exactly. I had
Not just,
a long conversation about
yes,
this yesterday on the group coaching call. It's a
yes,
trick, isn't
not
it?
just like, not just the idea, but there's this
Mm,
one Joe Dispenza meditation. I mean, he has so many, but there's one where he does such a good job of taking you through like to feel it in the body. And I
mm,
feel like it's not an easy, like that was not easy for me to learn. Um, and it took a lot of repetition. And I listened to the same meditation probably every single day for at least a year. Um, but that idea of not just thinking, not just reading, but also like you imagine it and you have to feel it in the body. That was
yeah,
really, really important. And then, I'm sure there's some other things that, on the mind body side that I've done that I'm forgetting about, but most recently, I participated in a clinical trial using psilocybin and psilocybin integrated therapy, essentially. This was a clinical trial in the United States. There were multiple sites set up. And, I'd been introduced to psychedelics through some of your work as well as other podcasts and things like that. And I was very interested in it, but I was also very tentative. I was just very cautious about the idea. Um, it almost brought more anxiety to
yeah,
me to think about doing this. Um, and so the clinical trial became like the perfect setting for me to start exploring this in a way that felt safe to my body
mm,
and to my mind. And I'm so grateful that I had the opportunity to do the clinical trial and have the psilocybin experience. I would encourage, of everything I've done, I that has to be top two.
yeah.
I may
What's
be
one?
wondering like what else would
Yeah,
be
yeah,
above it.
yeah, yeah,
But I just kind of wanted, I don't know. It was amazing.
yeah.
And it was just super interesting. The whole experience was fascinating. And I remember leaving and telling my husband, I think every single person in on the earth should be required to do
there's,
this.
there's a joke in this psychedelic community about like how people claim that the mushrooms try and sell themselves on the journey, right? Because everyone comes
Oh
out,
my,
everyone you start going around telling your friends and family you got to do this. You get hit with a brick
yeah.
wall,
I'm like,
literally.
yeah. So I mean, that's another one where I feel like I'm really hopeful that that's going to be something that maybe people can access
Yeah,
in the future. And I think that, I definitely always encourage people to at least
yeah, yeah.
consider.
I mean, I think so. I'm doing a series of these videos, and it comes up a lot. A lot of the people getting to an exceptional response in stage 4 disease have done it, and I think as we collect more data, there's lots of reasons why it would help with cancer. Nasha Winters famously has done 10 grams part of her healing journey, and I'm sure that was a key part of it. And then I think in Keller Turner's book, Radical Remissions, one of her key points was working on suppressed emotions. And I think it's kind of interesting because a lot of people don't understand. When I first read the book, I didn't really comprehend what that meant. And it's only once you do psychedelics and all this inner work that you start comprehending what that means to get rid of these suppressed emotions.
So it's interesting that you say that because while there were many positives about my experience, you know, at the peak of the journey, like there's a lot of great things that happened there and a lot of really interesting insights that came up. But for me, the number one experience I had was this was kind of on the way down from the peak. I suddenly started crying, but there was no memory that these tears were attached to. There was it just like I could feel my body saying, "You are not finished until you release all of this." And I don't know what all of this is. Again, this wasn't connected to anything. And the only way I know how to describe it, this is what it felt like for me. It was the feeling, this is going to be a little like weird to talk about, but like the feeling when you're throwing up, it like you can't control that
Mm,
and you know it needs to come out, and so you just let it out. It was most similar to that. Like I would cry for a few minutes, like cry, and then I would feel better, but then all of a sudden I would get another rush of emotion that
mm,
needed to leave my body. And just the fact that that was the first time in my life where I felt like I could feel suppressed emotions leaving. Again, I don't know what the emotions were. I don't know what the memories were. I don't know what the tears were about, but it was so vivid that like they needed to go.
mm.
And for me, if I could repeat any part of that experience, it would be that because that felt so freeing
Yeah, yeah.
in many ways. Like it just felt like I was lighter.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's kind of interesting. I love the way you articulated it, that like throwing up, because I've done a lot of psychedelics along my way, and that the ayahuasca experience is typically from the quite typically actually more from the stomach. So it's like it brings up that emotion more and more. But it's a very
Yeah.
similar, when the emotions leave from the stomach, it's a very similar. It is like throwing up, but it's actually the trauma being released. A lot of people mix the
Yeah.
two up. They think it's something wrong with the experience, but actually it's forcing stuff out of people. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, a lot of people, it's something, unless you've done psychedelics or, deep inner work, it's quite hard to comprehend that, this process that's been like this stuff leaving the body. Um,
It's so hard to explain, and I
yeah,
feel like people kind of look at me
yeah,
sideways when I say that, but
yeah, you
I
have to have
mean, I
done
don't
it.
know
Yeah,
how else to describe
you
it.
come, I mean, I remember after, similar to you, telling everyone about the experience of my first psilocybin experience and telling everyone to do it. And yeah, just been hit with brick walls. I think you're crazy and ignore you for a bit, and then
Oh,
and then you give up sort of trying to force people to do it. So
yeah.
and let them come to the way. Um, yeah, and that the one about story is interesting as well, right? Because it's been studied in mice that these traumas travel through at least 7 generations. So
Okay.
our conscious memory is not there in some instances. A lot of my trauma was from a womb trauma, and it's even the sense because you go back into the sensation that you were at that point in time. Um, uh, the emotions themselves, in my instance, were not adult emotions. They were very much like what an emotion would feel like in a baby in the womb.
Oh,
So yeah, so this it's kind of interesting that because as you were saying, that kind of that the an emotional release is kind of different from a normal one, right? Because you can remember the memory coming through, and it's got like a different texture to it. Um,
yeah.
that goes through at least 7 generations, potentially. Like, God, how far back? And some people in the space, I've never experienced it yet, talk about even past lives needing to be purged. I've
Oh,
not got to
wow.
that stage yet. And apparently, if you activate the third eye, if you really clean your third eye and get very clean with the third eye, you can start remembering some of these things. Um, but it takes training. My third eye's blocked.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's amazing how similar your story is to mine actually. So yeah, I did tapping, hypnotherapy. I didn't do cognitive behavioral therapy, but psychedelics as well. But yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, it's a great and I think what's great about what you've done is quite often one is not enough, right? They all have different values in the healing process, you know, and through doing many different things, you get a more holistic understanding of how to heal. Like the,
Yeah, and it's interesting because I've had some people say to me like, "Didn't that exhaust you? Weren't you exhausted doing all of that?" And it's interesting because I wasn't exhausted. I looked at it as like every experience had the opportunity to kind of open a new like portal in in the way that I experienced the world.
yeah,
And I thought it was really exciting actually um to have these new experiences because every experience taught me something, whether it was something
yeah,
about myself, something about other people, and it was like I was exploring a part of life that I hadn't experienced before.
yeah,
And
yeah,
so that to me, it was not, um, I didn't find it to be stressful. I actually found it was always like a new thing to learn,
yeah,
a new thing to experience.
yeah, and a tool you can take with you forever, right? It's you know,
Yeah.
it's actually
Maybe, or maybe, maybe or maybe not. That was the whole thing. It was like, we're just going to go try something and
mm,
we're going to see what sticks and see like what I choose to move forward with or what I choose to say that was interesting for this time that I needed it, but I'm, not going to carry it forward or whatever.
yeah, yeah.
Uh,
There's so many nuggets in what you talk about and subtleties that are quite difficult to articulate to patients who haven't been through the process. But the idea of the shifting energy, you know, the feeling, the
yeah.
the new you, effectively, you know, the one that's not worried about the worst case scenario that their oncologist has told them is going to happen, and flipping the story and feeling a different outcome. This is what Joe
Yeah.
Dispenza talks about, and it's actually a process in qigong. And if the idea behind these podcasts is people will start going through them and find commonalities, and a big commonality is that approach. People who use that, there's a lady I'm planning to interview soon, who used archetypes. She would pretend to be a hero or a warrior, and she'd wrap that cape on and use that energy to move in a different direction.
Yeah. And another thing I forgot to mention is I did a lot of work with story
Mm.
too, kind of in the middle. I took a writing class
Oh wow,
actually on how to tell your story and how to write your story. And I think the book was called Stories That Heal. I don't know, I might be getting that wrong, but it's actually a fascinating book, and I ended up taking a class with her and using some of those writing tools was another way to kind of reframe the stories mentally.
yeah,
So that was
amazing,
helpful too.
amazing. So much there on the mind body, and I love. I'm getting shivers talking to you about it because it's bringing back all the stuff I've done, and this is very. It's kind of it's interesting because there's not many people that will try even one approach, you know, and to try like 10 or so, you know, you really get a kind of deep understanding of things. And I'd encourage people to do a similar
Yeah.
thing. Actually, I do see a trend on people doing really well who train to become healers because they master something so well, they can do it on
Yeah.
others and on themselves. Um, so but we'll park the mind body there. It was a lovely coverage, and because there's so much to cover in this story, and I've got a qigong
Yeah.
class to go to in a bit. So
Okay.
so let's go through your the wacky IVs and SOT and cancer
Oh
vaccines.
my gosh. Yeah. So on that front, I mean, I have done mistletoe fever therapy. I went down to Atlanta, Georgia, worked with a physician there who specialized in mistletoe and did mistletoe fever therapy, did at-home mistletoe therapy, did sauna, tried to recreate kind of fever therapy at home with mistletoe and sauna. I did IVs, mistletoe IVs, vitamin C. I did ozone. Oh, I would drive like an hour away to get ozone therapy. Um, you know, I tried to connect with physicians that could guide me. I mean, that is one thing that is just kind of my personality is that I always wanted to do this under the direction of a physician. It didn't have to be like a standard of, it could be a naturopath, it could be, but I wanted to find somebody who I felt like had some expertise in this space. I think that's another theme in my story is just like networking and building networks with people that I felt were one step ahead of me.
Mm,
Um, and just this idea of learning through other people, that seems to be how I learn best. And it actually stems from my professional experience because I was in a job, I worked at a company where we were frequently moved to new departments. And these could be departments that we did not have
mm, interesting.
expertise in. And the only way to come into a role like that and do well was to figure out the inner workings of how the group worked, how the department worked as quickly as possible. And the
Mm,
only way to do that is through other people.
yeah.
And so that philosophy, I brought that over to the cancer space, um, because I did want to be an educated and informed patient. And I knew that I wasn't going to be able to get myself there in a silo and that I was going to need other people. So I did communicate with like many different physicians, almost to the point that I probably had too many people,
Mm,
because it became really hard for me to understand, you know, how to prioritize what all of these people were saying. But everything from supplements to, I mean, every type of supplement. I saw a doctor that specialized in antifungals
oh,
and
wow.
parasite work, and he would do acupuncture meridian testing on you. And through that meridian testing and kind of like energy testing, he would then do he would almost use this. It was almost like muscle testing, but it was a little bit different to figure out like which parasite medications and antifungals you should take. So
Wow.
I
I've got
did
to get
a
this person's details.
I did
I want
all of that.
I get
I
excited when I hear
did.
about something I haven't done.
Oh yeah, I
So,
did that. I did, every type of lab test, hair analysis, every type of like blood test I could get my hands on. I started doing circulating tumor DNA
mm,
testing. Probably, I think I did my first one in 2020, maybe. So that was when it was really new and just starting to make like little signals here and there. I've been doing circulating tumor DNA testing now for almost 6 years, I guess.
oh, you still do it, do you?
I do. I still
Oh,
do it every three
which
months.
provider?
So right now I'm using Natera.
Oh, okay, okay.
There's a couple others that I'd love to use, but
And it's
because
covered?
I started this so early, I don't actually pay for it. So
Oh, okay. Very nice.
trying to think, and then I think ultimately, I did a lot of IVs, I did a lot of supplements, and ultimately, I learned about vaccines and actually learned about vaccines from a patient. I started noticing more conversations about vaccines and attended a webinar by a physician at UCSD who had a clinical trial studying vaccines in cancer patients. And I remember he talked about how he had how his work and what he was really excited about was using vaccines in patients who were no evidence of disease but had
Mm,
a high risk of recurrence. And he was really passionate about that space, so much so that he had an arm in his trial for those patients. And right when I heard that, again, I was like, okay, this is the setting that I could do this. And while the webinar was still going on, I was on the phone, like trying to get connected to his office so that I could speak to someone to see if I was eligible for the trial. Turns out I was eligible for the trial. I think I actually got the last spot on
Wow.
that, 5 spots on this trial for patients that were no evidence of disease, high risk of recurrence. And so I started that in, I think it was mid 2021 and vaccinated into 2022. When I was leaving that trial, I asked him about continued vaccinations for people that are no evidence of disease. And he said to me, you know, if I was going to rewrite this trial, I would have a boosting component where we would boost patients regularly. And at the time, he's like, I don't know what that means. I don't know if it's once a year, twice a year, quarterly. I just think there needs to be some continued reminders for like new T cells and things like that. And so then that got me looking at how I could access vaccines outside of a trial because my participation in the trial was ending and I couldn't continue through that method. That's when I learned about the Jamie Leandro Foundation here in the US. I was also considering CGAT in Germany. Um, and ultimately ended up going with the Jamie Leandro Foundation. And like I mentioned earlier, worked really closely with them to the point that now I work for the organization in patient intake, where I talk to prospective clients about our vaccine program.
Yeah. And yeah, I just interject there at that point, following a lot of patients in my group who've done vaccines at the NED stage, in a lot of high risk cancers like sarcomas and pancreatic. And I don't think there's a single person that's recurred actually. So it's I think I've directed a couple of people to your organization who are doing very well actually.
Yeah. Oh,
Um,
good.
yeah, and then the others in Europe are CGAT and Next Gen Oncology, and I think there's a few in the US as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, for the NED stage, actually, from my research, there's nothing better that I see. But the unfortunate situation now is, unless you can get on a clinical trial, it's private and quite expensive for the
Quite
average person.
expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting one though, because I think when people look at the costs, it's one of the treatments that once given stays in the system, right? It's not like vitamin C that you go and it works for 2 hours in the body and then it leaves.
Yeah, I mean,
So
it does stay in the system, hopefully. You
well,
know,
that's we can come on to that because I know you're tracking
I mean, I think
immune
that's the
memory.
thing. I don't know that anybody knows how long, how long the memory stays. I don't we don't know at the Jamie Leandro Foundation. We haven't quite answered that question. Um,
Yeah, I mean
so
it's definitely years, right? If you look at the studies coming through, I think there's one from PanCam for Memorial Sloan Kettering. It's
yeah.
3 years
Yeah.
out.
I mean, I
So
agree. I think, we always tell people that we tell people a couple things. Vaccines should not be the only tool in your
mm,
toolbox. Again, you have to think about all the tools and how to sequence vaccines, especially if you have active disease. Vaccine
yeah,
alone usually isn't enough.
yeah,
And then,
I want to go into that actually because that's what we
yeah,
do at our organization is we help patients and doctors. Interestingly, we have doctors who pay us to teach them through looking at and that's a common mistake I see people making is is this kind of hope that a single thing will work and a lot just do a vaccine at stage 4 thinking it will do something, but it's quite often not enough. So we're
yeah,
developing this concept called the circle of immunotherapy. We've broken it down by 3 sectors: seeing the cancer, which is partly what the vaccine helps with, and then getting to the tumor, um,
yep,
and then finally killing the cancer cells with things like checkpoints and uh,
yes,
um, breaking down the stroma. So it's a complex process, right? And that's what we're trying to get across in our work. But we still see there's so many opportunities in the immunotherapy space, and it really it's a bit upsetting for me um, that so many people are not able to get hold of this research, and
yeah,
um, and it's kind of funny because it reflects the patient's mindset that I see. They seem to be blinkered by popularity of things posted on Facebook groups. So if something popular and ivermectin's been studied everywhere or femben, they'll blindly go into that. Whereas the complex research and things like this is missed in lots of people's, even in a lot of the top integrative cancer centers. There's a lot of cancer centers that give cancer vaccines that can't guide patients through this complexity. And actually, I think you've got that issue, right? Because you're not you can't provide advice.
Yeah. And, I think we talked a little bit about this before we got on the call or before we started recording. But yeah, JLF, we're an access point for people who want to get vaccines and can't get them through a clinical trial, but we're not a comprehensive treatment advisor. We
Yeah,
don't give medical advice. We don't give treatment advice. That is, patients have to work with their physician in order to figure out how to use vaccines. And it's one of the things that is most frustrating to me is patients don't always have they don't always have a group, a navigator, an advocate, a physician even that can help them think about how to where vaccines fit, when it's best to use them, what to do before the vaccine, what to do after the vaccine. That guidance in kind of creating a pipeline of therapies is missing.
yeah,
And
yeah. I mean, that's the gap we're trying to fill, but it's not that easy.
yeah,
It's kind of interesting because we're not doctors. We're problem solvers, mathematicians, technologists, business people.
yeah,
Um, and I yeah, there's a big gap there because I know almost all the top cancer centers out there that are doing vaccines and a lot of these things, and even there, it's very hard to get good information because a lot of the top, the top, there's a lot of branding involved in being considered the top. They're also not
yeah.
addressing this. So there's a big gap there, and it's what we're trying to solve with our research and our online portal, and we're building an AI tool to help patients access the research and doctors. Um,
Yeah.
and we,
Yeah, that's what they need.
yeah, and yeah, if there's something we can do that. I mean, I mean, it's kind of interesting in this space because the patients that doing, I've got a patient at the moment I'm coaching. She's just got to NED with triple negative stage 4, um, and she attended my coaching course where I train patients how to use AI. And what's fascinating is the depth of her research now is amazing. Like she's well above her doctors, right? She's like the stuff she's coming up with is next level. And I think
Yeah,
with AI now, you can really start when if there's a process of educating the patient to a certain level how to navigate the research, you can really elevate the outcomes. So that's the gap we're also trying to fill is training patients how to use AI because there is a trust issue. There is a lot, they hear 15 different people with different opinions. And I think if you can the only way you're going to navigate 15 different opinions is understanding what each of those are saying and stepping above it and being able to guide it yourself with some knowledge.
that's right.
Yeah. And I can see that in your approach. So um, yeah, it's a big gap. And yeah, I think it will be solved over time. And the other issue that comes up is a lot of doctors, certainly in standard of care, can't give advice of anything that's not phase 3. So they give this perception that checkpoint inhibitors are the only thing that can be done for immunotherapy, and they can't talk about all the other things that have very solid research behind it.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Sorry, and to inject there, it's a big topical point. Um,
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. And actually, early on, my radiation oncologist said to me, we were trying to decide between a couple different treatment paths, and there wasn't one that was really felt superior, and I wanted him to make the decision, and he looked at me and he's like, "But CEO, like you have
yeah,
to make this decision." And I remember being so mad at him that I kept thinking like, yeah, but I didn't go to medical school. I don't have the knowledge that you have. But like looking back, he's right. You as a patient, even though it's the hardest thing in the world, you do have to be in a position where, you're it. the CEO isn't always the expert in everything.
Exactly,
They have
exactly.
the experts that work for them, and those experts bring ideas to the table, and the CEO is like you said, one step above being able to kind of interpret and decide. And
Yeah,
I think that is the mindset that it's a mindset shift that I think people I would encourage people to try to make.
yeah, yeah. I think it's critical. Again, if you go back through the other videos on my, I think, slowly growing YouTube channel, it's a common topic of people who have got to NED from stage 4 disease, in that they've had to step into that role and step above. You have to step
Yeah.
above all the information pools they have, because as you've been through and I've been through, when you access the huge range of different things out there, whether it's SOT, a cancer vaccine, mistletoe therapy, the doctors administering those things don't know about the other areas. There might be an expert in mistletoe, an expert in vaccine, but they've got no idea about all the other things.
Yeah.
So yeah, and it's really tying it all together that gets the good results.
Yeah.
And can you talk a bit about what JLF Foundation is doing now? So they're an access program, and I'm particularly interested in the data they're collecting. You mentioned it before the call.
Sure. So the Jamie Leandro Foundation we're a nonprofit dedicated towards helping patients access personalized vaccines when they can't get them through a standard clinical trial. Think about JLF as it's kind of like a general contractor model where we have all of the relationships with various vendors and partners needed to help a patient go from intake, which might be kind of tumor sequencing and HLA typing, all the way to designing a vaccine, to manufacturing a vaccine, and ultimately administering a vaccine. So we navigate that space on behalf of the patient. We manage all of those vendors for the patient, and then on the front end, we provide support to the patient so that they understand where their case is throughout that process. Part of our program, we are under the purview of the FDA, and we have an open clinical trial that it is a clinical trial. We are studying a couple things. One thing that we're studying is immune responses. So, are these vaccines able to elicit an immune response in patients? That's done via a blood draw at three different time points in the program, a baseline, and then before your dose number 6, and then again before your last dose in the program. And so obviously we're looking for changes in immune
Mm.
response over time. And
Is
then
is that
most,
data available yet, or is it still being
so
worked on?
it's technically not available. I will say that if someone has a cancer that they're interested in, if somebody comes to me and they're interested in a certain type of cancer, I can at least communicate what some of those immune response rates are.
Mm.
Always have to caveat that because these immune responses, first of all, I'm giving an average in a cohort. So
Yeah.
we might only have 10 patients in that cohort. And we run a flexible model. So we allow concurrent therapies if a physician feels that that's appropriate. We don't put any limits on what people can do with vaccines. So there's a lot of things that can enhance immune responses. There's some therapies that can dilute immune
Mm.
responses. So I can verbally share some of the immune response data with patients depending on kind of the cohort that they're interested in. But because of the way that our program is structured, there's just many caveats about the data. Again, we weren't set up certainly we want to generate insights that can help the broader field in the quest for understanding how to use vaccines. But we were set up to help patients get access first and foremost. And we lean on the rest of the field, particularly the clinical trials happening in the space, to answer the questions around efficacy. So while we have like some data to share, it's there's so many variables that are playing into that data that it makes it hard to isolate the role of just the vaccine. But we do see that these vaccines are eliciting immune responses in patients. And we see that those immune responses can change over time, where patients can strengthen immune responses against certain peptides, and sometimes some of these take longer to show up. So, I mean, there definitely are some interesting findings. But again,
I would
there's
love
just a lot of
yeah, I
variability in the
would. I mean,
data.
I'm not now because it would be too technical for this. But would you be willing to go into? I mean, are you able to talk about that in detail?
I'm probably, yeah, depends on how detailed you want
Yeah,
to
very
go.
detailed. I'm upset. Yeah, very because I think we also track in some of the clinics I work with they do at least spot after 3 months of the vaccine, and um, but I'm very intrigued in the day zero testing. That's kind of an interesting one because you can
Oh,
cross correlate that with what other things have they done, like ivermectin as an immunogenic cell death inducer. And if you really, it's
yeah.
fascinating that so you have that data as well. So you've done
Do you
the
have a,
sequencing, and then you've
yeah.
tested the peptides against a non-vaccinated person immune system. That's
So
very interesting.
we have the day zero for every patient that's a part of our
Yeah,
program.
yeah. That's gold dust, I think, because yeah, yeah, I'd love to know. Uh, yeah, I mean, particularly if they've done other things as well, because that data is like it's very useful
That
for patients to know.
Yeah, that's where it gets harder for us is that, developing the infrastructure that allows us to track all of the things that patients are doing and have done over time. We do have a system in place now to help us track. We're starting to collect more longitudinal data around overall survival and progression-free survival. So that's ultimately what patients want to know.
Yeah, yeah,
We don't have that information right now, but we're starting to pivot and build an infrastructure that gets there. But answering those questions about like what else are they doing and how did that influence, like that just gets so hard to do at scale.
yeah. I mean,
Um,
that's one
AI
thing.
can probably be
Yeah,
a
yeah.
tool
I
there,
mean,
sure.
it's something that we're working on because we recognize the problem because we work with other vaccine providers and clinics that are interested in doing these sort of things, and it's a problem we're looking to solve with our. So it's will help. So we're building our own um, analysis tool
Yeah.
for collecting the data and allowing people to put in what they're doing, and then also connecting with vaccine providers and the likes to um, so you're in a position where you've got all the data from the patient, the clinic's able to monitor what they're doing. That's because I
Yeah.
think that's a big win for a lot of people, certainly in this space. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, interesting problems you're trying. The data I think you'll get will be gold dust for the community. And I'm
Yeah.
just realised that a lot of people may not understand what the elite spot test is. So um, it basically, correct me if I'm getting anything wrong, but you've done the sequencing, you've worked out the specific RNA DNA that correlates to the cancer. That's what you're building for the peptides for the vaccine, and then you test the immune cells against activity against those peptides. That's correct, is it?
Outside laboratory, it's done via a blood draw. Basically, there's a well for each peptide, and then you spin down the blood, you extract the T cells, you combine the T cells with the peptides, and you're looking to see if those T cells secrete a certain cytokine that shows recognition.
Granzyme
And
B.
so yeah, so you will get, a reading for each of the peptides in your vaccine,
Yeah,
and you'll understand if it was you'll also understand kind of the strength of that response, whether that was a weak response or kind of a very strong response, or kind of where the response is. It's a tough test to know how to use clinically though. Um, I think there's just, again,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
not.
yeah. I mean, I'd love a call if you're. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, a separate one and a deep one. I quite like to get what I want to be doing is having these really deep conversations because I think there's a lot of clinicians out there starting to kind of enter this world, and I think that would be a very interesting because most
Yeah, we could.
clinicians don't know these tests exist, right? And it's very powerful, right? So let's say, I mean, how much would it cost for the sequencing and say the first test?
So the sequencing that again, we use outside laboratories.
Mm,
So we're using labs like Personalis, Tempus. We can use CGAT. As long as it's whole exome, whole transcriptome, so DNA, RNA of the tumor with a normal matched sample. Usually that's the data that we need to design a vaccine. Um,
yeah.
so sequencing, the prices range depending on the vendor. A lot of times these US labs will have financial assistance
Hmm.
available. They bill to insurance. So for some patients, it could be free.
Yeah, wow. So you can get the sequencing done for free, or actually some of these providers not too expensive. And then the elite could somewhat because I'm just intrigued, but because it's very useful. There may have been a patient, say for example, particularly with triple negative, who've done ivermectin, which in my studies was kind of curative in combination with checkpoint inhibitors. But it's very risky to go on checkpoint inhibitors if you don't have immune memory in place. So
Okay.
it'd be very useful for a cohort of patients to be able to get the sequencing and have this elite spot test done at. And is this something you could facilitate as an organization?
So
Okay.
not so we can only facilitate it as it relates to our protocol. So
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
the one thing about JLF is a lot of times people come to us and they want to do things outside of our protocol, but we again we have a open research study that's approved by the FDA for to do research. So we do have to follow the structure of the protocol
yeah,
as
yeah,
it's.
yeah. And so who do you use for elite spot testing?
We use a lab called Cure Science.
Cure Science. All right, so I'll look them up. Just give me some ideas, so
Yeah.
put that in their portal. I might contact them. Amazing. Wow, wow, so much we've covered.
Yeah.
Is there anything else we've not covered?
I don't think
How do
so.
patients contact you? Are you okay people contacting you if they're interested in a cancer vaccine?
Sure. Yeah, sure. So probably the best way if you're interested in a cancer vaccine, the best way to get connected is just by going to our website, jamieleandrofoundation.org. And there's a contact us form that you can fill out. That'll come directly to me, and then I will send you a program summary that includes a video, 15-minute introductory video that you can watch that just explains the program's costs,
Mm.
logistics, timelines. And then if people want to see if they're eligible for the program, there's instructions on how to submit your records for an eligibility review.
Oh, brilliant, brilliant. Um, if you could send me, so that video, you have to sign up first, or there's a video on the link straight away?
There's not a video on the
Oh, you
website,
have to
so
sign
I'm
up.
happy to send it to you. You have to access it with a password,
Oh, okay. It's more
but it's
for
fine.
our portal. We're trying up for our Hacking Cancer portal to be an information portal for patients so they can go through it. So
Oh,
yeah,
I have no problem. It's just it could be to you, and you can do what you want with it.
yeah, yeah.
We're
Okay,
not trying to gatekeep any of this information.
yeah. Okay, amazing. And then they would go through the JLF Foundation website, and then they'd get in touch with you. That's the best way to reach you, is it?
Yeah, and then they can watch the video, and if they're eligible, then we do a one-on-one call where we talk more specifics about their case and what steps that particular patient needs to take.
Yeah,
Sometimes people don't need to get the sequencing because they already have it.
yeah, yeah. Good point.
Sometimes, so that's when the interactions become unique to that particular patient.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. And is there anything else we've not covered? Do you think's relevant?
I don't think so. I think we've touched on a lot of
Yeah,
topics.
yeah, it's a
So
lot. I've loved it because it's so similar to. I think we have a lot of commonalities. I was also an athlete at university or pre-university.
Yeah.
And I think probably in that fighting spirit came this kind of like, I've got to fight to do everything to turn this
Yeah.
around. And I think that was key.
Yeah.
And I think if more patients did the same thing, particularly in the mind body, right, that ability to switch the story and
Yeah.
to start, not manifesting a poor outcome, but like looking to pull it around and shifting that
Yeah.
energy. So,
Yeah, and I feel like those are the things that are lowest cost too.
yeah, yeah,
Like, when you think about it, these are the things that are really widely accessible.
yeah, yeah. So yeah.
Some of them, not all of them,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
but
yeah. But when you start
that,
looking it's around, like I often people tell me like, "Oh, who do you recommend for like meditation teaching or body work?" And I'm like, what I've found is there's no correlation between fame and skill. In that, quite often in a small town in the UK or somewhere in the US, you go to your local yoga center and you find some amazing healers that are
yeah,
not publicly well known. And I
yeah,
think if you look, you find.
that's
Yeah,
right.
yeah. Very good, amazing. I really loved it. Thank you so much, Julie, and wishing you the best of luck on your continued journey.
Okay, thank
And
you.
we'll keep in touch.
Okay, sounds good. Thank
Thanks,
you.
thanks a lot.
Bye.